His funeral cost $2 million. 1,000 guests showed up. Not a single tear was shed. I've buried thousands of people in 35 years, but this funeral, this one changed everything I thought I knew about success. The setup, who he was. Let me tell you about Richard. That's not his real name, but his story is real. Richard was 72 when he died. Massive heart attack in his office at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. He was worth $400 million. CEO of a company with 3,000 employees, owned houses in 5 countries. His obituary ran in every major newspaper. The funeral was held at the most prestigious location in the city. Custom Italian casket lined with silk. Flowers imported from 6 different countries. A live string quartet. Everything money could buy. And 1,000 people showed up. Business partners, employees, investors, politicians. The parking lot was full of luxury cars that cost more than most people's houses. I remember thinking as I prepared everything, this is going to be the biggest funeral I've ever handled. And I was right, but not in the way I expected. The funeral begins. Something's wrong. The service started at 2 p.m. I stood in the back, like I always do, watching, making sure everything runs smoothly. And immediately, I noticed something strange. The room was packed. Standing room only. But it was quiet. Not the heavy, grief-filled quiet I'm used to. It was uncomfortable. Awkward. Like everyone was there because they had to be, not because they wanted to be. His son gave the first eulogy, 38 years old. Stood at the podium in an expensive suit and talked for 6 minutes about his father's business achievements. The companies he built, the deals he closed, the awards he won. Not once did he mention a memory. Not once did he say, "I love you" or "I'll miss you." He spoke like he was giving a quarterly earnings report. Then his daughter went up. She was shorter, 3 minutes. Talked about his work ethic, how he was always busy, how dedicated he was to success, and then she sat down. And here's what got me. Her eyes were completely dry. No tears, no emotion, just nothing. The realization, a room full of strangers after the family, they opened it up for others to speak. And this is where it got really sad. His best friend of 40 years stood up. Talked about golf games and business trips. Made a joke about Richard always picking up the check at restaurants. Sat down. 2 minutes. A colleague talked about how demanding he was. How he expected excellence. How he built an empire. For minutes, another business partner shared a story about a negotiation Richard won. Everyone laughed politely. 3 minutes. I've been to thousands of funerals. And usually, this is the part where people break down. Where someone shares a story that makes everyone cry. Where you hear about the small kindnesses. The dad jokes. The way they made you feel loved. The impact they had on your life beyond work. But nobody said any of that. Because nobody had those stories. And then it hit me. This man spent 72 years on Earth. And 1,000 people showed up to his funeral. And not one of them actually knew him. They knew his business. They knew his money. They knew his reputation. But they didn't know him. And worse, he didn't know them either. He spent his entire life building an empire and forgot to build a single real relationship. The casket closes. Not a single tear when the service ended. We moved to the burial. This is usually the hardest part. When the casket gets lowered into the ground, that's when people lose it. I've seen the toughest men collapse. I've seen entire families break down. It's the finality of it. The moment you realize they're really gone. So I watched as we lowered Richard's $2 million casket into the ground. 1,000 people standing around. And I looked at their faces. His son, stone-faced, checking his phone. His daughter, staring into space, emotionless. His wife, of 43 years, dry eyes, ready to leave. The business partners, already talking amongst themselves about work. The employees, relieved the mandatory appearance was over. Not one tear, not one breakdown. Not one person who looked like they'd actually lost someone they loved. And I thought, this is the saddest thing I've ever seen. This man accumulated everything society tells us to chase. Money, power, status, success. He won capitalism. And he died completely alone, surrounded by 1,000 people who didn't care. The contrast, what I saw, the next day, the very next day, I had another funeral. Maria, 68 years old, retired elementary school teacher. She made $34,000 a year for 40 years. Lived in a small house her entire life. Never traveled internationally. Drove the same car for 20 years. Her funeral was at a local church. Maybe 70 people showed up. Basic casket. Grocery store flowers. No string quartet. No designer suits. And it was the most beautiful funeral I've ever witnessed. Her former students, now in their 30s and 40s, stood up one by one, crying, sharing stories about how she believed in them when nobody else did, how she stayed after school to help them, how she showed up to their graduations and weddings. One man, must have been 45, broke down completely. Said Maria was the only adult who ever told him he mattered, that he was smart, that he could do something with his life. And because she believed in him, he became a doctor. Her own children shared memories. Not achievements, memories. The way she made breakfast every Sunday. How she'd leave encouraging notes in their lunches. The sound of her laugh. Her best friend of 50 years couldn't even finish speaking. Just stood there, crying, saying, I don't know how to do life without her. And when we lowered her casket, the entire crowd was sobbing. Real, deep, soul-crushing grief. Because they had actually lost someone they loved. Someone who had invested in them. Someone who had made their lives better just by being in it. The lesson, what actually matters. So here's what I learned from those two funerals, 24 hours apart. Richard had everything money could buy, and nothing that actually mattered. Maria had almost nothing money could buy, and everything that actually mattered. And the difference? It's simple. Richard spent his life accumulating. Maria spent her life connecting. Richard built a fortune. Maria built relationships. Richard was successful. Maria was loved. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Richard probably thought he was winning. He probably looked at his bank account and his houses and his company and thought, I made it. I'm successful. I won. But when I closed his casket, when I lowered him into the ground, when I watched 1,000 people walk away without shedding a tear, he lost. He lost the only game that actually matters. Because, at the end, and I've seen this thousands of times, the only thing that matters is love. Not the love you received, though that's important. The love you gave. The lives you touched. The people you made feel seen and valued and important. And Richard gave none of that. He gave his time to work. His energy to deals. His attention to money. And when he died, he had all the money in the world, and not a single person who genuinely mourned him. What a waste. What an absolute tragedy. Meanwhile, Maria died with $1,200 in her bank account and 70 people who will miss her every single day for the rest of their lives. So ask yourself, are you building a fortune or building relationships? Are you accumulating wealth or accumulating love? Because I promise you, I've buried both kinds of people, and only one of them dies peacefully. Only one of them is actually mourned. Only one of them lived a life worth living. The warning you're choosing right now, here's my warning to you. You're becoming Richard or Maria right now. Every day you choose. Every time you pick work over family, you're choosing Richard. Every time you chase money instead of connection, you're choosing Richard. Every time you're too busy to call someone you love, you're choosing Richard. And one day, I'll bury you. And the only question that will matter is, will anyone actually cry? Or will they show up out of obligation, check their phones, and move on with their lives? The choice is yours, but choose carefully. Because I've seen how both stories end. And trust me, you don't want to be Richard.